Thank you, Lenny and Susan and James. That having been a McKinsey client for the past 30 years, the most exciting thing about that is that report was in color, and it was very clear. Thank you for that. This is very exciting. We're very lucky this afternoon to have with us Fred Smith, who is well known to everybody here in this town, but also throughout the business community. Fred, as you know, founded in 1971 and runs a little tiny $50 billion company that has been a masterful game changer, I think, in really global trade and global commerce, and has, I think, enabled the internet to do what it does today. Just a couple small accomplishments in his career. The other thing we like to brag about, Fred, is that you are a long-standing CED trustee, and we appreciate all your contributions and support of CED. So if I could, please welcome me please join me in welcoming Fred Smith today.
Thank you.
So Fred, these are really interesting game changers, and I know you have been preaching many of these subjects for a very long time and advocating for policy in this area. And I think you have some thoughts, some slides to share with us on specifics about that. So maybe I should start with letting you sort of run through your thoughts on that.
Well, I'll be brief because it's hard to follow an outstanding presentation that you just saw by Dr. Lund and Dr. Manuka. I completely agree with every single thing that was put up there. And I applaud CED and its outstanding leadership in having made this presentation to all of us. Let me mention a couple of people here. Gene Adams, our Senior VP of Government Affairs, and Dr. Susan Schwab, former USTR, who is a member of the FedEx Board of Directors, so I'd be remiss if I didn't mention them. I'll try to focus on a couple of things and not be duplicative of the McKinsey items, but I've given a number of talks on this subject in general, but let me focus you on a couple of things that we continue to point out in terms of the lack of growth in the United States economy. Let's put the charts up on the screen if we might. The first and most important thing is that U.S. GDP has been going down on average for a long period of time. The second slide shows something that I always get enormous amounts of good grief. This is really something. That's the relationship of capital investment in equipment and software by private firms and job creation in the United States. I think I'm correct. I was a liberal arts major, but there's about a 93% correlation between those two. So no investment, no job creation. If you go to the next chart, you'll see that underinvestment has been a central part of our inability to create the jobs that everybody wants. Now, perhaps during the 1990s, maybe we had, as Chairman Greenspan famously said, a period of irrational exuberance, and we overinvested, particularly in, the early days of the internet when people were coming up with businesses for which there was no market. But in general, the correlation between low investment and job creation since the beginning of the 21st century is indisputable. Next chart shows that less investment today, less growth in the future. A lot of us learned that when we were kids and we got $100 or $200 from a grandmother, and you could take it out and spend it on beer, or you could go buy yourself a lawnmower and make money for every week of the year for the rest of your college career. And that's the fundamental problem we have in the United States. Too much consumption, not enough investment, no future growth. Next slide. That's public construction. That puts an exclamation point on what Dr. Lund, I think, pointed out for the lack of investment in public infrastructure for many, many years now. Next slide. And the government investment, as you can see, is declining at a rapid rate. It's about 1% of GDP. During the 1960s, it was 4 times that amount, and so we are living off the seed corn of what our parents and our grandparents put into the ground. Next slide. Oil prices. The central part of an industrial society is energy. So it's no surprise that one of the 5 game changers that McKinsey pointed out is to produce more energy in the United States. I'm the co-chairman of a group called the Energy Security Leadership Council, which is a group of CEOs in energy-intensive industries and a group of 4-star retired admirals and generals who came together about 7 years ago to try to change energy policy in the United States because of the serious implications for United States foreign and economic policy. I'd point out to you that General and then later President Dwight D. Eisenhower, early in his presidency, said quite plainly if the United States imported over 15% of its petroleum needs from other countries, it would be a national security challenge of the highest order and dangerous for the United States. Of course, in 1973, 40 years ago this fall, the first Arab oil embargo took place, and at the time we were about 37% dependent on foreign petroleum. And that got up to almost 60% several years ago. But since the beginning of this century, we've had a significant change, and you see this incredible chart of the increase in the price of oil over the last 10 years, which has been driven in the main by the demand from the emerging world, particularly by China, which is different than 73 to the 2000 period of time. And one of the things that we pointed out at the Energy Security Leadership Council over and over again, the oil market is not a free market. It is controlled by the marginal barrel that is produced by OPEC. And so you have perturbations in the oil markets and a higher than market-based price for the commodity. So our solution in the Energy Security Leadership Council, next slide please. And by the way, I just say that the increase in energy taxes, energy prices is the same as taxing the American people. As you can see, 10 years ago, the average household spent about $1,200, $1,300 on gasoline. You can see in 2012, can't even see it over there, $2,700. So all of the beneficial effects of the payroll, tax reduction, the holiday, and so forth simply went to pay for fuel. Next slide. As you can see, and as McKinsey pointed out, the good news about it is that the fracking revolution, first for gas and now with oil, is leading the United States to a point where we are producing liquid fuels, both oil and liquid natural gas, that is going over 10 million barrels a day. And when the oil level gets to that point, we will exceed Saudi Arabia's 9.7 million barrels of oil. Next slide. As you can see, the lines are converging between domestic supply and our imports. We're now down, I think, to about 40% from 60%, as I mentioned. But you've got to remember that this phenomenon over the last several decades has been, simply put, the largest transfer of wealth in the history of the world. The United States has gone from being an oil independent nation to one that imported oil to win World War II. And lest you forget, World War II for the United States began with an oil embargo when we cut off the oil from the Southeast Asia to Japan. That's why they attacked the United States in the end in Pearl Harbor. Rommel was not going to a vacation in Egypt when he was fighting in North Africa. He was trying to get to the oil fields in Saudi Arabia. And the biggest military battle in history, Stalingrad, was fought over a severance of the Volga to keep the Caucasus oil from going to the Soviet troops. And finally, the most heroic air mission of all time was August the 3rd, 1943, when the U.S. Army Air Corps bombed the Ploesti oil field. So this is not an insignificant factor, and again, it's why the Energy Security Leadership Council came into being. And our recommendations were very simple: produce more here, use less, and diversify the transportation system to the extent possible by adopting all electric and hybrid electric for light duty vehicles and utilizing natural gas for heavy duty vehicles over the road and centrally fueled like garbage trucks and buses. Next slide. There you can see that the huge part of our trade imbalance that is because of oil. It's been 50 to 60%. So every dollar that goes out of the United States to buy this imported oil comes directly out of our GDP, and the multiplier effect. It'd be one thing if we were engaged in a reciprocal trade environment, but we're not. And the next slides, I think, continue to show that as a huge percentage on trade deficit. Next slide. The third issue is the tremendous imbalance that we have with China. As you can see over the years, everybody makes a big deal out of it, and we love China. We've been there 25 years. We're the largest transporter of goods by air and wonderful Boeing 777 airplanes. But at the end of the day, as Chairman Bernanke said this morning, China manipulates its currency. He said it before Congress to engage in mercantilism. And several years ago, as Dr. Schwab will tell you, they brought forth a new policy called indigenous innovation, which is one of the most euphemistic terms for protectionism I've ever heard. But the result of that is that we sell to China about $100 billion worth of goods, and we import from them about $400 billion. They learned it all from our friends in Japan. Next slide. And again, we love the Japanese. We have a huge business there, a hub and so forth, but the Japanese economy has been closed and restricted. Their currency actually did run up, which led to some good things like plants, Nissan plants in Tennessee and so forth. But again, those three things: lack of investment, the United States dependence on foreign petroleum and the deficit in petroleum trade, and finally the inability to engage in a more productive trade relationship are at the heart, along with a lot of government regulations and litigation and things of that, in my opinion, to the low growth rates that you saw in that initial slide. I'll close by saying this: if there were one thing that could be done that would change this circumstance, in my opinion, more than anything else that could be done with a stroke of a pen, it would be to change the corporate tax code. Because at the end of the day, capital investment in equipment and software, and you saw the almost 100% relationship between CapEx and job creation. It's to change America's tax code because it is punitive. It punishes equity investment, it punishes capital investment, it rewards financial leverage, speculation, private equity, and the maintenance of trillions of dollars of U.S. corporate money overseas sits there because we, among two industrialized countries in the world, have a worldwide tax system as opposed to a territorial tax system. So if you could put the United States corporate tax rate down to a competitive level of approximately 25% and go to an appropriate territorial system, and everybody understands with the high-tech companies it's easy to move intellectual property things around. Not so easy when you're actually moving goods the way we do. the transfer pricing mechanism is pretty straightforward. But unless we change that tax code, we're not going to get the kind of investment and job creation. And finally, I think the '86 Tax Act, in retrospect, was great for '86 when about 13% of U.S. economic activity was international trade. It is absolutely not the thing to have when over 30% of our economy is related to international trade, because it equalized small business and individual returns and at the expense of raising corporate taxes. And the reality is the C Corps, the large companies like FedEx with a capital budget this year of about $4 billion, and the so-called gazelles like Google and Facebook and all of these fast-growing emerging businesses, those are the businesses that make that capital investment. And so some way we've got to get out of this dim the lights, let's take care of everybody. And this is not anything new. The Kennedy administration recognized this and put in an investment tax credit. The Reagan administration used targeted investment incentives, and in my opinion, in addition to the marvelous revolution of energy production, the most important thing that drug us back out of the recession of 9 and 10 was the administration's promotion of 100% expensing. So if you can't lower the taxes on all corporations, the second best thing is to allow corporations to write off investments when they're made, because it improves the net present value. But most importantly, it reduces the risk of making capital investments. And that's what goes on in every boardroom, as Susan will tell you about ours, is should we make this investment, and what's the world going to be like 3, 4, 5 years from now? Expensing allows you to mitigate that risk by getting your money back the year or as soon as you have the ability to produce the profits to fund it. So with that, I'll turn it back to you.
Isn't he great? I mean, this is why we have him here.
Thank you.
So, Fred, if you go back to that analogy that I started with the glass half full or the glass half empty, it's just striking to me that, America has always been an optimistic country, and so much so that I think some of our European friends describe us as naive because we are so optimistic. But it just seems like in the last half a dozen years, we've lost a little bit of that optimism. Why do you think that is, and what do we have to do to regain it?
I think we've lost the optimism because we're not producing the jobs, and the economy isn't growing. I mean, Keynes, you quoted him from 1930 in the same period of time. He was talking about the importance of entrepreneurship, which is a key ingredient, the animal spirits. I can't remember whether it was Adam Smith or Keynes, but one of them. But Keynes, I thought, yeah. And, I've dealt with entrepreneurs and watched the landscape. No company is more interconnected with the global economy or the economy of the United States. The Fed talks to me every month about what we're seeing. I think this is directionally right. My guess is that between FedEx and UPS, we have 15% of the national GDP in our planes and trucks every day. So we see this up close and personal, and when people's lives are not getting better, when their incomes aren't improving, they are pessimistic. And as I tried to show there, we've been going down for a long period of time. And I think there are many reasons for that. But when you dissect it all, Steve, it's clear that the vast majority of roads lead right back here. It's policy choices, and it's policy choices in Europe and China that have come full bore. In the last few years, you've seen Brazil become more protectionist. You've seen India become more protectionist. The Doha round is stalled. The Trans-Pacific Partnership has stalled. And so they're just as a dour mood. We're not getting better, and I think the regulatory and litigation environments are very retardant on economic growth. Many of the things that I said and were in the McKinsey Institute study have been said by Professor Michael Porter of Harvard, who's done a great job in publishing reports the last couple of years on American competitiveness. So everybody is saying the same thing. It's just the folks down the street can't or won't deal with the issue the way we were able to in years past. It's that simple.
So you just put an exclamation point then on McKinsey's recommendations, which is we've got these things out there that we could be doing. We just have to get out and get going. Well, back, whatever it was it 40 years ago, 40 plus years ago, you know, as a young entrepreneur, you were a game changer. Did you know, last question, did you know that you were a game changer? Did it feel like that to you? Could you see where this was going? And then, what advice do you have for those now who have this kind of a vision and a dream?
Well, the answer to the first question is we clearly understood it was a game changer. I mean, that's why we did it. The fundamental premise of FedEx was society was going to automate, and it had to have a completely different logistics system. If you wanted to sell computers in San Angelo, Texas, despite the fact that you made them in the IBM plant in Armonk, right up the road from Manhattan in those days, incredibly, if you can believe that, the banker in San Angelo, Texas had to be convinced that the computer was going to operate every day 100% of the time because they got rid of all of their clerks that used to post the debits and the credits on the checks. So that was beginning everywhere. I mean, cockpits were becoming automated, hospitals were becoming automated. Now we've reached, you know, the sort of the end of the line when our entire institutional memory is in our device, and our CIO looks like some Martian. He's got about 6 of them on it. So we knew that was a game changer. And let me give you a statistic which is rarely quoted, but it's profound. When FedEx first started, the cost of logistics as a percentage of GDP was about 16.5%. Well, because of FedEx and other developments in the transportation sector combined first with the deregulation of transportation in 77, 80, and 94 by the U.S. Congress, getting federal regulations out of the way, and then the force field accelerant, which was globalization, which opened up all these new customers, and I commend Ambassador Schwab for her leadership in this area. And finally, for the first time in human history, a standardized, visual, interpretable protocol in the form of the internet have led us to today where our GDP costs are about represented by logistics, transportation, the interest on inventory, warehousing, is about 9%. So all of the social benefits we've been able to fund, Medicare, Medicaid, all these sorts of things, they all come from our national productivity improvement due to the transportation innovations that I just described to you. So it was an incredible game changer. One of the reasons China is having such a big problem getting their consumer society going, which is their goal, they're so export dependent, is because logistics costs are 20% of their economy. Why are they so high? Because there's regulation, there's protectionism, there's cronyism, and state champions and one thing or another. So their society and economy as a whole suffers for the benefit of the few, which was exactly the case when transportation was regulated and you came up here and tried to outlaw the other side. So yes, we knew that it was a game changer, and it has proven to be, however, wildly bigger than we ever thought in the initial days.
Ladies and gentlemen, Fred Smith, thank you.